Let us now see how can we script our player's movement. But before we do that, we have applied in the previous video a rigid body on our player. Because of that, we need to give him something solid in order to make him stand, or otherwise he's going to fall down. And for that, I'm going to take our ground 1 and I'm going to place it here. And let me just resize it a little bit. So something like this. This is going to be our ground. So 0.5, let's say 0.5 on the y-axis. And I'm going to apply a box collider on our ground. And also I'm going to tag it with a tag ground. So here I'm going to create a new tag and name it ground. And in case you missed it, how to do it. So here we have this tag. We can click on the drop down list, go under add tag and simply create a new tag. Clicking on this plus sign, we can create a new tag and tag it however we want it. So here I'm going to select now our grounds 1 and I am going to tag it with the tag ground. And I am also going to go in the prefabs folder and create here grounds prefabs, and I am going to drag and drop our ground prefab here in order to save it as a prefab. And now I've created a scripts folder. Inside of it, I've created player scripts folder because we are going to keep everything organized. And inside of it, I've created a player script. So let me just drag and drop this script here on our player, and we can hit apply so that this change applies to our prefab. And we can now double click it so MonoDevelop will open it here. Now, in order to program our player script, we need a couple of variables. We need a public float, which is going to be our player's force. We are going to name it force X or move force. So move force is equal to 20. We are also going to have jump force, which is going to be equal to, let's say, 700. And we are going to have max velocity, which is going to be equal to 4. And I've set all of these variables to be public so that we can manipulate them in our inspector panel. Now I've set or declared all of these variables in one line. This is the same thing as if we would do like this. Public float move force is equal to 20. Public float jump force is equal to 700, so on and so forth. So this is the same thing that we are doing here, but we are doing it, well, in a much simpler way in one line of code. So here we have 3 float variables: move force, jump force, and max velocity. We also need a private rigid body, which I'm going to name my body. And we need a private animator, which I'm going to name anim, and we're going to use them in order to animate and move our player. And here I'm going to create the awake function where we are going to get a reference to these variables. And I'm simply going to create here, we are not going to use the update function, but we are going to use the fixed update, but I am going to create below it void initialize variables. And here we are simply going to get my body is equal to get component, passing the rigid body 2D as the component that we want to get. And our animator is equal to also get component, passing the animator, so animator, because we want to get the animator component. We are going to set this in the awake function. We also need one more variable, and I just remembered that. So we need a private Boolean variable, which is going to be grounded. So grounded. And this variable is going to tell us if we are on the ground, not if we are grounded from our parents. So anyway, this variable is going to tell us if we are standing on the ground so that we can know if we can jump or not. Now, in order to move our player, we are going to create here a void function, player walk keyboard, and we are going to call it here in the fixed update. So instead of update, we are going to have our fixed update, and we are going to call our function here so that we can move our player. So inside of this function, I'm going to create float force X is equal to 0f, and also a float force Y, which is equal to 0f. We are also going to get the velocity of our rigid body. So here I'm going to say float vel is equal to my body but we are going to get the absolute velocity. So I'm going to say mathf.absolute because this is going to give us a positive number always. And we are going to say my body dot, and we are going to get the velocity dot x, because we are going to use our max velocity variable in order to control the velocity of our player. And here I'm going to create float h is equal to input get axis raw, and we are going to get the raw axis for our horizontal axis. Get axis raw is going to give us a positive or a negative number, and it's going to be 1 or negative 1. So if we press the left arrow key or A key on the keyboard, it's going to give us negative 1. If we press the right arrow key or the D key on the keyboard, it's going to give us 1. And for what we are going to use it, well, simply we can now test if our h is greater than 0, meaning we are moving in the right side. So if we are moving in the right side, we first need to check if our velocity that we have here, so if our velocity is less than our maximum velocity, what we are going to do is we are going to set our force x to be equal to our move force. And also what we need to do is we need to face our player in the right direction. For that, we are going to get the scale of our player. So I'm going to say vector3 scale is equal to transform.local scale. And what this means is if we go back here and I have my player and we have his scale here. If we are moving left, we need to face our player to the left side. For that, we can set the scale to -1, and we now see that our player is facing the left side. If we set it to be 1, then our player is facing the right side. Well, we are doing this or the same thing, but through our code. So our player is moving to the right side, so our scale x is equal to 1, and our transform local scale is equal to scale again. And because we are moving, we are simply going to use our anim set boolean, and we are going to set the walk parameter to true. Because if we go back here and we have our player selected in the animator panel here for our player's animations, we have the walk parameter, and we are going to go from idle to walk when walk is equal to true. This is what we are doing here. We are setting walk to be equal to true, and that way we are moving, or we are going to play our player's animation. Here I'm going to say else if our age is less than 0, meaning that we are going in the left side. I am going to copy this right here because the code is going to be the same, except our force x is going to be equal to negative move force, and we are going to set the scale to -1 in order to move in the right direction. And here I'm simply going to say else if our age is equal to 0, meaning that we are not moving, I'm simply going to set our player walk animation to be equal to false, so that we show that we are not actually moving. And lastly here we are going to take our body or my body, add force, and we are going to pass the new vector 2. This is going to be our force x, and this is going to be our force y. And this is how we are going to move our player. So now if we go back here and we have the script attached on the player, if I play the game, we see that our player is moving and we are playing the animation when the player is actually moving. So we see that we can move the player and, well, we can control him. What we can also do is we can add a jump to our player. So here we are going to test if, and let me just go here, if our input get key, and here I'm going to pass the key code space. So if we press space, we are going to test if we are grounded. So if we are on the ground, then we can actually jump. And for that, or the first thing that we need to say after that, our grounded is equal to false. And after that, we are going to set the force y to be equal to jump force. And that way we can jump. So let me just go here, and now if I press the space key, we are going to be able to jump, or excuse me, we are not jumping because if I go back here, our grounded is set to be false. So let me just set it to be equal to true here. And now if I go back in my Unity editor and run the game, and let me just close this or remove these errors that I'm getting. And if I jump now, we see that we are jumping like crazy. So what we need to do in order to correct everything is first we need to make sure that we cannot jump again, and we did it right here using our grounded. We also need to go here, and for our player, so let me select the player, and for the rigid body I'm going to set the gravity scale at 2. So I'm going to pump up the gravity scale and hit apply. Also, I'm going to go here in the script and I'm going to create void on collision enter. So enter 2D, and it's going to take a collision 2D target parameter. And I'm going to test if our target dot game object dot tag is equal to ground. Then our grounded, so our grounded is equal to true. So this is how we are going to determine if we can jump or not. So now if I go back and run the game, so now if I jump, we see that we can actually jump, but we have a high jump. We can correct that simply by selecting our player, and here for the jump force, I will set or add 600 and hit apply. So that's why I set all these variables to be public, because now we can control them like this. So we have the jump force for our player. What we can do is when we jump and we want to control our player, so we see that we are jumping and we are trying to control our player. For that, we can go here and we can test when we want to add force to our force X, we can test if we are grounded. Then if that's the case, we are going to set our force X is equal to move force. But else if we are not grounded, so else meaning that we are in the sky, we have jumped, we can add move force multiplied by 1.1 F. So this is going to give us a little bit control over our player. And we can do the same thing here for our left side, but we need to add negative force here and negative force multiplied by 1.1. This is going to give us a little bit control for our player when he's in the, well, ground, or excuse me, when he's in the air, we can control him a little bit. What we are also going to do is we are going to apply a physics material to our player. So here I'm going to go create folder and I'm going to name it materials. Inside of it, I'm going to create a physics 2D material. And I'm going to name it bouncy or bounce for our player. And I'm going to set the bounciness to 0.1. And I can select the player and apply this material on his box collider. And let me just hit apply. So each change that we make, simply hit apply so that that change applies to our player. And now we can run the game, and when we jump, we have a little bit more control over our player, which we see, and also when our player hits the ground, he bounces off a little bit. So this is it for making our player move, and he fell down. Also, if you feel that these controls are not the way you want them to be, we can also alter our linear drag, so we can, well, drag our player a little bit more, so now we can control him a little bit more. We can set the gravity scale to 3, so now our player can jump even less. So now we see how can he jump. We can now pump up our jump force to 700 and our player can jump a little bit more. Actually, I like these controls a little bit more, setting the gravity scale, let's say at 3, and set the linear drag at 0.25. Or we can, well, move the linear drag. That's up to us. We can simply, well, play the game and see how we actually want it to be. So I'm going to set the gravity scale at 3 and I'm going to set the jump force at 700. I like these controls. But you can experiment and see which controls are good for you. Anyway, make sure that you hit apply so that each of these changes applies to our player so that we don't lose everything that we set up here. At the moment we are finished with our player and we can move on.